right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're here, this is the inaugural Synth Sundays from VLSC Records and the Atlanta Synthesizer Club, hosted by me, Flohr, on VLSC Twitch. And today our guest is Walker Farrell from Make Noise, and we're going to be talking about the new Strega device. Walker, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to make sure our chat is open, so looks like we can see folks in the chat. And I'll try to keep an eye on this because we may have some Q&A promptings from our folks in the chat. Thanks,
Excellent,
y'all, for tuning in. So why don't we just get started first with, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you, Walker, and about your history with Make Noise and what you do for the company. That might be a cool way to start.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, just really quick, thanks again for having me on, Flohr, and it's nice to be back with the Atlanta Synth Club. I've probably met some of the people who are tuned in, I hope, at an event that y'all put on in Atlanta a few years ago when we had released the Morphogene. Came and had a great time chatting with a bunch of y'all, and I look forward to the time when we can do it safely in person like that again. So my name is Walker Farrell, and I have been working for Make Noise since 2013, and my position is instrument specialist, so which is a very broad kind of phrase that could mean a lot of things and does. The biggest part of my job these days is making YouTube videos for our YouTube channel, which I've done ever since I've been working for Make Noise, but we've gradually added more and more emphasis to that. I also I help with development of products, do beta testing. Sometimes I do organization of other beta testers and kind of collecting feedback and stuff like that when we're developing stuff. I work with the production crew on creating and kind of refining the test procedures that we do on the production line to ensure that, everything that we send out into the field is in good working condition and calibrated correctly and all that. And then I also do events when events are happening, and I do things like this virtual event today. And generally whatever it could be that involves bringing word or information or inspiration about our instruments out to the public, I usually have a hand in that, writing manuals to things like that.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, obviously you have your hand in many things, it seems like. So,
well, we're a small company, so we all wear a lot of hats.
That was sort of my next thing I was going to bring up. So, I don't exactly know the audience for this. We've got whoever's on our Twitch, but we're also going to post it on YouTube. And so some people may be coming to this from general synthesis interests in synthesizers, but not know much about modular or not know much about Eurorack. So we should say a bit about Make Noise as a company. So for those who are interested in modular and Eurorack, Make Noise is kind of a household name. It's become sort of like the, one of the major companies that people think of in terms of Eurorack. But you are a very small company. This isn't a huge music tech corporation, and I had the pleasure of visiting the headquarters in Asheville when I was there for the 10-year anniversary, and it is a small operation. And so maybe if you could give a little insight into like how many people, especially, I don't know if because of the pandemic, if it's been smaller or what's going on, how many folks are involved, and then in terms of design, we can talk about what Tony does or other things, and that maybe can segue us towards some of the more technical discussion.
Okay, that sounds good. So just as to piggyback on what you were saying about Make Noise's kind of place in the world of synthesizers, Make Noise became a company in 2008, founded by Tony Rolando. He made his first module, the Mod Mod, which was a ring modulator, basically. And that he made that in a spare room in his house, and 40 units, something like that. And then started to get demand for additional modules. And in the next couple of years, he had designed what a lot of people, including myself, would now consider big classics and staples of modular synthesizers for these days. Like, for example, Maths, which continues to be probably our most popular module and one of the most popular modules around. He also designed the quad multimode gate, which is a four channel filter and gate that was kind of developed to be a partner to Maths. And unfortunately, that one's really hard to produce, so we don't currently make it. We didn't make it for a long time, but it's become also one of those kind of legendary modules that's really sought after, and people sell for kind of ridiculously marked up prices and stuff like that. And in around 2012, started doing some collaboration on digital algorithms with SoundHack, Tom Erb of SoundHack, and we have a number of modules that are collaborations with SoundHack. And then over time, we've continued to expand to where a lot of what Make Noise has done is create full instruments that you can buy directly instead of having to piece it all together yourself as you would with modular synths mostly. The first example of that was the shared system that you see behind me here. This is the original shared system that was used for a record series back in 2012 and 2013. It was passed around between several artists: Richard Devine, Alessandro Cortini, Surachai, Robert Ike Abrilo, and Keith Fullerton Whitman. They each made a record with it and then sent it back to the shop here. And then Make Noise started selling the shared system as a complete modular synth that you can buy ready to play. And it has continued to be kind of our flagship system with some little changes over the years as we've added things that are new to it. But for the most part, it's kept that same basic form factor. And then in 2016, we released the Zero Coast, which is a portable synth in a little box about this size that is patchable, has a lot of the same concepts as modular, but instead of being a case with modules in it, it's a complete synth in itself. It's got a MIDI input. It's a little easier to, more approachable than like starting a big modular system or something like that, but you get a lot of the same kind of thing that you get from modular synths. And we've then released a couple more additional things in that form factor since then, including last year, the Zero Control, a sequencer for it. And then just this year, the Strega, which is a collaboration with Alessandro Cortini in the design and Tony did hardware design on that, of course.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things you just covered that I want to kind of circle back to. First
kind
of all,
a lot of information.
Yeah. Info
13 years of instruments now.
Yeah, the info dump is real, but that was a lot. So for those who didn't know who Make Noise are, that's a really good summary, I think. And there's of course much more to the story, but I was smiling impishly when you were talking about the QMMG and Maths, just because I have two Maths and a QMMG in my system. I was lucky enough to get one of the newer QMMGs. I don't have this old silver one, so I have the new black one. And I am not going to sell it for an inflated price because it is priceless. But it's a very nice module. And I mean, no reason to be fetishistic about it. It's just a really good module. So I was going to say, if I had any suggestions back to the origins with the Mod and the kind of the ring mod soul of Make Noise, maybe. The mod demix is my favorite ring mod circuit I've ever used. I think it's unbelievably beautiful, and I want a quad demix. I want a 4-channel mod demix. So
that sounds pretty rad.
Yeah,
I think the mod demix is I love it too. I think it's one of the overlooked modules in the Make Noise line because it's been in production for a really long time. And actually, for anyone who is listening and didn't catch the difference, Mod was first, but Mod Mix is kind of an update of that circuit that is a little more powerful and flexible that came out pretty shortly after the original Modi mod. So they are similar. It's a ring mod / VCA with mixing kind of involved, kind of matched into it as well.
And obviously, it's your rack. There's plenty of other choices, and I know that there are companies that make a quad bipolar, what do you call it, 4-quadrant multipliers.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something very special about the Modulation circuit, especially for those who have one. If you haven't tried this, when you have it at very low level, like right around silence,
mm-hmm.
there's some weird things that happen that are very special.
Yeah, the way that the Modulix is weird because it has some characteristics. We usually call it crossover distortion, where when the amplitude of the wave that's going through it gets lower, the distortion happens when the amplitude is lower instead of when it's higher. Like normally on most kind of saturation and distortion circuits, you distort by making it louder, right? And on the Modulix, you distort by making it quieter. And it gives this sort of like crispy tails to a lot of sounds that definitely have a different kind of vibe. And if you like the Modulix, you'll be happy to know you'll be enjoying the activation section on the Strega, which you might recognize. These 4 dots here are kind of analogous to the 4 LEDs on a Modulix in terms of what they're showing and what they're doing to the sound.
Yeah, and that brings up another point that I always like to make about make noise. When there's some there's a lot of opinions on the way that synths should look, and online people have thoughts, and make noise has a very clear aesthetic, and some people like that and some people don't. But one of the things that I think is important to point out, I mean, not everything has to be utilitarian, and I think there's room for whimsy and just like being avant-garde for avant-garde's sake in instrument design. But that said, the style and the iconography does have a purpose. So the panels mean things. There's symbols that communicate things to the user, and it can be intimidating to someone who hasn't been properly indoctrinated, maybe, but
indoctrinated.
But I do think that the panels are telling you what it does. Right? I mean, that's.
Yeah, I think there's very much the aesthetic and the functionality of it are completely tied together. I would say we have there's a certain visual language that's been developed over time, and it's usually a depiction of signal flow that prioritizes kind of a visual of how things are connected, how and where they're connected over the verbal concepts of it, which verbal concepts are also related on the make noise panels, but a lot of times we'll think a lot about like, what should we call this parameter? Because whether it's something that is a parameter that synthesists are already familiar with or not, what you call it, what the parameter is called has something to do with how you approach it. But I also would say that, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I also would say that kind of we would aim, and in designs, Tony aims for you to be able to, like, once you've played the instrument some, to really not be reading at all. You're really just going to learn the physical layout of it more than the labels of things, and you won't need to read while playing it once you've done it some.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's clearly intentional, as you said, and there's good reasons to do it. You call something an envelope, and you're putting it in a certain category, and leaving it a little more open, and having this experience of interacting with it, looking at it, touching it, seeing how it spatially relates to the rest of the system. You can start to come up with uses for things that maybe. That's the whole point of open architecture, right? Rather than, if we want to call it open or not, than a fixed architecture design. I did want to go back to something you were touching on earlier when you were talking about the shared system and the music series. I mean, as make noise music is often the title of the company, right? And Make Noise
on a
has,
lot of platforms.
and Make Noise has released music as well,
Mm-hmm.
and not just instruments. And the relationship between instrument design and actual music making is a fascinating one. And I believe it was Amelie from Mutable who said something about being a meta musician. There was this phrase of that designers can be like meta musicians that create conditions of possibility for music, right? Something like this.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting concept. But I guess in terms of the relation to Make Noise and Make Noise's relationship with musicians, that the Strega is a collaboration with a musician. This is sort of part of the marketing around it. Part of the buzz is this thing. And we can talk about Alessandro and Tony, but it was just striking to me when we were talking about the shared system that musicians, people who perform and record live with these modular synthesizers have played a big part of Make Noise for a while, right? I mean,
yes, absolutely. I think from the beginning and from at every point, I mean, a lot of what Make Noise is going for in any design is being something a musician will want to use. And we always get feedback from working musicians while we are developing things. We've always put a collaboration with musicians at a priority in terms of kind of just displaying or talking about how our instruments are used. And the record series was the reason for the shared system to exist originally. I mean, the shared system was the concept of the record series predates the concept of a system that would be sold as a whole piece. And then that sort of grew out of that was, this is a, now that we have heard from artists on this, let's sell it as an instrument that other people can buy as well.
Yeah. Which is very different from like, we've got our new product. Let's go get these licensed artists to, hype.
Yeah, I mean, of course, at the end of the day, we are making things that we want people to buy, but it's the point of it is to be a musical instrument. And another thing that I think is very important to the company is that people who work here are musicians, and that goes for people from salespeople to people packing things and building things. Working on the production line, anybody who interviews for a job, they're going to encounter the question, what's your relationship to synthesizers? What's your relationship to music? What music are you into right now? People who are passionate about music, that's as important as being passionate about synthesizers to Make Noise. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And Tony makes music as well. I happen to have caught a short modular on the spot set from Tony at one point, and that's been part of the design to make things to make music with. Right?
Tony was a working musician for a long time before he started the company. He was in a touring band, singing, playing keyboards. And then at some point after that dissolved, he decided to start designing synthesizers. So, and I think he would say, if you asked him, that he hasn't been as much of a musician in the last decade or so because he's been so busy designing things. But I feel that he's been coming back around to being a musician himself again in a big way. He's been really excited about various things that he's been working on musically, and he's got a record coming out sometime in the next couple months. Actually,
I didn't know that.
So,
that's
awesome. Unfortunately, I don't have a link to it or anything like that. I've only heard him verbalize it, but people should keep an ear out for that.
If we get info on it later, and then we host this when we repost it on YouTube on the Synth Club channel, we'll add a link or something. But
I will try to remember to ask Tony if there's any kind of link about it after this is over today, and I'll send it to you. Yeah, that
would be great. So that's a sort of a segue into this question of collaboration on the design front. So as you said, Tony's the founder, he's the main designer. in terms of circuit design. But there have been other collaborators. You mentioned Tom Erb, and there's a series of modules made with Tom Erb on the DSP front, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I know, is it Yerpa 58? Is he?
Yeah, we don't work with him anymore, but we also have Matt Sherwood, who has done work on Zero Coast, Tempe, and certain other. And he basically at this point, Sherwood works on all the firmware related stuff. It doesn't have sound hack.
Okay. So there's a few other figures over the years that have contributed, and then but is this? We talked about the relationship with artists, but is this collaboration with Alessandro on the Strega, is this kind of a new thing? Like, I mean, do you think that this is actually like a qualitatively different than the kind of sense in which artists have given feedback and
Yes,
that's the sense I get.
That's a good question.
So I'd like you to speak to that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good question, and it does lead me to an important point, because as you mentioned, I had kind of wanted to emphasize that artists and musicians that their feedback is very important to what we do, and of course that it's musicians here working on developing things. But the idea of the Strega is definitely different because Alessandro is an equal part in the design of it from the start. And that was, in fact, even from before the start, I could say, because Tony and Alessandro have wanted to create an instrument together for a really long time. They've had several things that they've been kicking about for a lot longer than just when they were working on the Strega, none of which ever actually made it to market until now. But so this is something that was a long time coming, and we definitely consider Alessandro to be a collaboration between Alessandro and Make Noise, in which those two are equally weighted as far as who contributed what. And I would say that Alessandro doesn't do circuit design, but he sat with Tony listening to lots of different possibilities as Tony was sitting there making connections on the breadboard, and that the conversation around the breadboard grew into the Strega.
Okay, that's really cool. And I guess more about the Strega, and maybe we can transition to some audio, or and if you have we'll be able to switch to a camera that shows it or not.
We should. Yes, I have.
Okay. You don't have to do it yet.
Camera.
Yeah.
Right up here.
You don't have to do it yet, but maybe right around the half hour mark, maybe we can, or sometime towards the end, we'll move more towards that, I think.
All right.
So, I am curious to talk about, you already brought up the standalone devices that are not racked, and one thing is I kind of enjoyed the ambiguity around the naming of the, as you called, Zero Coast. I liked calling it No Coast, and I guess some people called it the O Coast. But I'm wondering now, with the Zero Control, has that codified that the correct name is Zero Coast? Because no one says No Control.
That's interesting. We have explicitly tried to say all of them.
Okay.
Whenever I script a video, I try to put all three in there. I even type them out in my scripts.
But is it always Zero Control? Oh, you say No Control and O Control? Okay, good. Okay.
Now, me personally, I've always defaulted to zero. Like, I'll say Zero Coast when I'm just talking without thinking about it. I know that Kelly. I don't know if I mentioned Kelly. She's the other owner of Make Noise, Tony's partner, and also very important to the company. She calls it O Coast, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
And I actually got into it wasn't an argument exactly, but Kelly and I had this back and forth over whether it should be A or An before that, because if it's O Coast, it should be An O Coast.
Yeah.
If it's No Coast, then it should be
No Coast.
And that actually kind of almost sounds just like an O Coast. I don't know. This became a thing where I just kind of remember having this conversation over which indefinite article we should use with this device.
Yeah.
But I think that we kind of figured, I thought it was a little goofy when Tony first said zero coast or no coast or O coast. And I was like, well, which one is it going to be? And he's like, any of them. And I thought it was a little goofy at first, but then I found that, it was something people talked about all the time.
Yeah.
It was something that kept people talking. And
undecidability and play,
Yeah.
there's something there. But I very much enjoy the concept of the standalone devices. Of course, because it's Eurorack modular culture, there's going to be people who are like, I want to rack this. Why can't I rack this? And there are people who have found ways to rack them, right? But from a design perspective, there's an intentionality behind making it a desktop unit, right?
There is. I mean, this is something that we talked a lot about during development. I mean, it was a lot of going back and forth over whether something like the no coast should be a Euro rack, should be able to be put in Euro rack. But in the end, what we wanted to do was not compromise it as a tabletop device. So, and there were things about the design that would have had to change and mess it up a lot in order to make it easily put into a Euro rack. It would have been thicker. It would have cost more. It would have yada yada yada. So it would have been a compromise to its real identity to make it into something that was a Euro rack module. And also, when it comes down to it, we don't really think of it as a module because it's both less and more than a module. A whole synth voice doesn't make as much sense to us as a module. And it's lacking in a lot of the things that modules of any of its component parts would have, if that makes sense. It's definitely more of a tied together like whole entity.
Yeah, it's a complete instrument that is not a patch programmable. I mean, obviously you can do that, but it wouldn't hold the same range of possibilities of an individual module in some senses. It's hard to obviously can do so many things because an
example would be it's got a zero coast has some of the components that a maths has, but it doesn't have all of them, and they don't work together the way they do in a maths. They're very situation driven to the way they fit into that. So it's not as useful as a bunch of modules would be in a system, and it doesn't. It's just I don't know. It's not what it is. It's not a module.
Yeah.
Now that said, plenty of people have managed to put them into cases.
Yeah.
And,
people like to put all kinds of things in.
This is the synths, and especially patchable synths and modular. Like it's kind of a DIY thing, even when you're not doing DIY to some degree. So however people want to do it is fine, but we can't fix it when they break it.
And none of the 3 standalone devices, because there's now 3 in the series, right? And none of them have been made to be racked. They don't. That's right. What they come in is their body. They don't come in a little case that is meant to be swapped out, right? So. Right. I'm interested in that because that's a new direction for the company. Obviously, since the release of the No Coast, as I'll call it, there's been many more modules since then. So it's not it's not like a pivot away from Eurorack at all. It's just, but it's a new branch of what Make Noise produces. So someone theoretically, I mean, most people I know that have a No Coast also have a Eurorack, right? I do know people who do not have any modular that have one, right?
Yeah, and that is really where it's at. We wanted to have instruments that you didn't need to have a modular in order to have. I mean, part of that is just cost. I mean, the cost of having a modular synth that would have the components that a No Coast has in it is much more than what that box costs.
Yeah. Easily double, probably.
Yeah, so to make that more accessible was a big goal there. And that sounds like it makes it, if you've got a big modular system and you wish you could put it in, I guess I could see why you think that actually makes it a little less accessible in some way, but it's giving more people the access to this kind of synthesis, which is really what that was one of the goals there.
Yeah, and I think it succeeded in that, and it continues to. The question then, sort of in relation to that, of who's the audience, who's the potential. I'm always interested in what are the ways into something, whether it's an idea or an artist or a thinker, and there's some gatekeeping in some contexts where there seems to be very few ways in, and then there's other things that present multiple pathways into them. And so the Strega is striking to me because it's something that seems to present multiple pathways into it, right? It's unclear. Is it a voice? Is it a synth? Is it a effects processor? Is it both? Is this for people with systems that we want to patch into it? Is this for people with a no coast as a buddy? Is this for people with no other synths that want to touch and interact with it? Could different types of musicians want to run their instruments through it and process things? So maybe you could speak to all of those, and we can start talking about some use cases, and then we'll transition over to the demonstration part.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. So you're asking if is it a synth or an effect, or is it for people who don't have any synths? I think there's a couple things that I guess I'd touch on with that. One is what we've been calling it internally when we're kind of giving an adjective or a noun to it that's not just its name, is an echo synthesizer, because it is a synthesizer, and it does have effects, but the effects are so integrated into the sound of it that that we think of it as like the synthesis engine like incorporates the echo part into it right from the core of it in a lot of ways. And however, I guess when you're asking if it's also for somebody who doesn't have any synthesizers, I mean, the fact that it works as a sound processor has been really fun and interesting to me. We haven't published these yet, but I'm working on videos where I just plug other stuff into it. I play glockenspiel through it. Other synthesizers, like little ones like the Korg Volca FM and stuff like that. Whistling into a microphone and ring modulating it sounds really cool. So I guess, yeah, it's kind of flexible in that way. There's a bunch of different, how did you put it? Entryways or
ways in. Yeah.
There's a bunch of different ways in. At the same time, we've kind of been aware of the fact that it's maybe not, it doesn't have the kind of universality that something like the no coast does, because the no coast is like, it's a synthesizer. It's got all the synthesizer concepts in it. You can make bass lines, leads, drum sounds, whatever. Strega is a little more specific in its sound and its way of working, but I do think there's still a lot of ways to approach it, just in a different way from the other stuff.
Yeah, and I mean it's both unique and also it has clear connections to other synths in the history, but also in make noise design. And actually, I realized there's one question I definitely wanted to ask that I forgot about until just now. So before we transition over to maybe some more hands-on stuff and audio, I want to talk about touch plates and touch interfacing. And one of the striking things about Eurorack, I mean, besides that it's tactile with patch cables and knobs. But when I first went over to Control in New York, which is where I first saw Eurorack modular synthesizers, the make noise touch plates was a striking thing to me. They had pressure points set up. There was Renee with the capacitive touch for the steps, the grid.
Right.
And then there's a maybe not as popular, but the teleplexer. There were other modules in the history of this company that have had this kind of interactive tactile element. So maybe you could speak to that and then how that came into play with the Strega.
I think that one important thing to mention with that, and something that I haven't really touched on when talking about make noise generally, but that I think is pretty important to the philosophy of the company, is that there's a lot of history to that. To the metal touch plates that are not arranged in a keyboard fashion or in a grid. Although I guess with Renee, they aren't instrument grid. But the idea of metal plates that you touch that aren't necessarily just lined up as a row of notes like a keyboard would be, that goes back to the 60s and 70s with Bukla's tactile interfaces, Surge's touch keyboards, and these are things that are kind of arbitrary voltage generators that aren't necessarily made to just play notes on, although you can do that. The idea of kind of a touch interface that's universal in terms of how it's going to interact with the system is something that has history in synthesizers, and that's also been important to Make Noise to kind of be taking concepts from music technology that aren't necessarily brand new and putting our own spin on them. And that will go all the way back to the Mod which is kind of based on radio technology and has its faceplate had radio towers and signals flying through the air. That was what you saw on the faceplate. And up to, we've done obviously those touch interfaces have that kind of history. Things like the Morphogene that is based on ideas from tape music and computer music, microsound, things like that. The DPO has a lot of influence from Bukla's complex oscillators as well as from Moog oscillators. And there's just having a foot in the past and one in the future is a big thing that we aim for at Make Noise. And now that I'm mentioning it, I don't know that there's as many direct kind of instrument influences with actually there are with Strega, because it's a lot of Strega's sound came out of Alessandro telling Tony what instruments he loves and what he loves about them and things about the way that they interact. So, and the one that Tony has brought up a lot when talking about it is the EMS Synthy and the fact that its signal flow has a saturation at a lot of points throughout, and that was something that he put a lot of into Strega as well. There's a number of different places and ways you can saturate it, and it's a lot of feedback paths. You can kind of like saturate the saturation in a lot of different ways, and that specifically is inspired by the Synthy, but also by what it was that Alessandro liked about the Synthy and how he plays with it specifically. So it was kind of like a distillation of that concept into something new.
Yeah.
I got pretty tangential there.
No. That's all great. That was great. Yeah. And I mean, I think there's something, it's like this evocative of history, but also unique, that is what draws so many of us to these instruments. So, and also, for anyone I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him, but anyone who's watched interviews with Alessandro Cortini, he's a very articulate at expressing very particular idiosyncrasies of instruments, of why he connects with them, and then also having his voice come through in whatever he's using. So, and I think it's fine. There's lots of different ways to make music. Some people, they don't have one kind of voice, or they really bend to different things. But he's someone who he takes these instruments, and then there's a way that he works with them that is very unique, and it's cool to then have an instrument that has sort of come out of that. So, do you want to maybe turn to the Strega now? All the saturation talk. I think, maybe
we can do that. Really quick, since you were saying that Alessandro has a particular way of working with instruments, I have noticed that he will find some particular characteristic about something and find a way to laser focus on it, and then make that into his own thing. And that's I definitely think that's I think what has been achieved with Strega is basically making an instrument that's just nothing but those quirks, and that can all be laser focused in on at the same time.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So, all right, we've got 15 minutes left, so why don't we go full on?
Let's see, I'm just gonna take a quick second to switch up my microphone and camera here.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Actually, anybody who's in the chat now, I realize we kind of went on and did our own thing. Do we have any questions for Walker before we get into the demonstration? We can also we can hold those, or actually, we can start making the moves towards the demonstration, and then any questions you have, anybody in the chat, just ask them, and then we can take some time and respond to questions. And since we got a slightly late start, would you mind going 5 minutes over or something? If we
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can go as long as it needs to get.
Okay, so we'll do that.
Sorry, I may have left this in limbo for a little bit too long. Let me. Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Here we go.
We got the cam now.
Okay, so you can hear me. Can you hear this? I think it has mirrored my camera, or maybe it's just for me. Does the Strega look forwards to you or backwards?
It's normal, yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. So here we have, can you hear the synth?
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. So here we have the Strega being controlled by the zero control. And, well, I'm just gonna pull all the cables out. And we can go over it a little bit. I guess I was thinking that I'd probably be answering questions about it, so I didn't really make a specific patch here, but I'll just go over a quick...
Yeah.
I can go over a quick overview of the kind of general signal flow of Strega here. So
that works.
It has an oscillator we call the tonic and tones circuit. So tonic being, turn down that echo a little bit, being the pitch of it, and then tones, we have the tones control that kind of travels through a number of different timbres. A thing I really like about the tones control is that instead of kind of becoming more harmonically rich as it turns up, it starts with by adding some higher harmonics, and then it goes down into subharmonics after that. And this is designed very much around the way that it will saturate the echoes. So that when modulating, you'll have different levels of saturation that are kind of interacting with each other. To get the tones into the time circuits, we've got the activation control, and activation is it's a lot like the Modumix, since you had mentioned that. It's a bipolar VCA that can be either modulated by something like an envelope, or it can be modulated by audio if you have an audio source to go into it. Unlike something like the Modumix, it has an offset and an attenuverter on it, so you have a little more fine control over how those different elements are interacting. For example, I can turn up the activation control a little and then do negative modulation to kind of duck it. This is pretty useful if you're using the external input, because you can do things like have the sound that you're using duck this oscillator or ring modulate it or things like that. And then on the right side, we have the time circuit. Out a little bit there. So this is actually several delay circuits that are built into Strega, and they all have their own unique feedback paths, their own unique responses to the CV inputs and filtering, and it also has some modulation that can be extreme if we like. We also have a filter that is in series with all of those echoes. It's actually more than one filter, but basically you have one filter control that's going to control all these things. And if you hear the echoes going through, you can hear.
And I had a quick question about the echoes. Is that a digital delay or an analog delay?
It's a hybrid.
Okay.
It's all analog I/O. There's no firmware on it. It has some digital elements in the chips.
Yeah, I heard something about it being like a karaoke circuit or something.
It uses a whole. It uses several delay chips that are all kind of wired a little differently from each other, but and then they're all mixed with the output so that you hear a whole bunch of echoes all at once.
Okay.
And then we have the Agitation Generator, which is a triggered LFO that, if left alone, will just loop, and it's normal to the filter, so we can easily have it do filter modulation. And then there's a lot of internal places in which things in this circuit will bend back onto each other. And in most of those we call things like interference. And we have on activation and tonic, we have dedicated interference knobs. If we turn up tonic and listen to it and then turn up interference, we can hear that it will start to get modulated by the interference, which is coming from the delay and filter circuits.
That's really interesting.
We can actually hear the change in the interference by changing things like the delay.
So it's like a noise source, is that right?
It's. I would say it's closer to feedback than noise specifically.
But it works as a modulation source as well as a part of the audio path.
It's primarily a modulation source.
Okay, but it's derived from the feedback.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's coming from the time and filter circuits, and is kind of a mostly unpredictable modulation source, but one that you can control to some degree by changing the settings of time and filter or modulating them.
Oh, I did want to cut in real quick just to say to anyone who's joining us late, if you have questions for Walker at the end, any kind of more general questions that aren't about the Strega specifically, we'll try to answer them. So just type them in the chat and we'll go back and take a look at it.
And then if you have a specific question about what he's demonstrating with the Strega, just go ahead and type it, and I'll try to read it out as we're going, or make sure that Walker sees it, and maybe he can answer it as he's going. Yeah, so looks like Dylan from our crew asked about if whether or not it could be rackable. We covered this earlier, that these are all designed as desktop units. So
yes, that's right. This there's no it's designed as a desktop unit. We won't. I'm sure that somebody will figure out how to force it into
of course,
a Euro rack. But it's not a module, so we can't provide support for that kind of.
Yeah, of course the levels are all the same for anyone who's curious, so it'll work with all of your Eurorack stuff.
That's right. The I/O is all Eurorack level and Eurorack compatible patch points, so you can patch it with modules, no problem. Let's see. I was also going to mention the interference to the activation circuit, which if we turn up, when there are no echoes, the interference is not doing anything. You have to have some kind of echo in order for interference to show up. So I can create it by turning the time down far enough for a minute that it generates some noise and clicks, and that'll make the interference come into the activation circuit here. Add it to the pitch. It's hard for me to tell if the levels are good here right now. Hopefully this is audible and not drowning my voice out or blowing your ears out.
Yeah, it's plenty loud.
And then we have a number of patchable or touchable signals that are coming from inside the Strega and can be routed around it. One is there's a sub oscillator output right next to the main triangle output, which is normal to this time CV input, and so that will create modulation of the time circuit that changes rate depending on the oscillator's rate. You can kind of hear it as little bumps.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a number of sub-oscillator outputs that are available as these touch bridges. For example, I could touch one of them and send it into the pitch or kind of a trill. They could also be sent into the activation circuit. You can basically touch any number of these different plates at once to route as many signals into as many destinations as
That's really cool. I had a couple quick questions about those. One is, are there any connections that can be made through touch that cannot be also patched or made in other, like, is it just an alternative to making connections with cables, or are there functions that can, I mean, obviously the way that you interact with it that's a separate thing, but the connections themselves, are they replicable, or are there certain ones that you can only do by touching?
They are mostly unique to the touch modulators.
That's very interesting.
I would say that the agitation bridge, or a gateway, the input for agitation is basically the same as the input, and so is the tonic, but with time and filter, They're weighted differently from the other CV inputs. They affect different parts of the feedback paths than the CV inputs do. Most of these outputs are not available as patch points either. So it's kind of another layer of modulation that's not the same as what's in the jacks for the most part, I would say.
Okay. The other question I had is the touch plate, the actual implementation of it, the same or similar to previous ones, or is this a unique, like the actual material it's made out of and how it works, the circuit, etc.? Is this
the material is I'm pretty sure the same as on like these touch plates on the zero control. It's the same material, but the way it works is pretty different. So with something like the zero control, you are going to touch the touch plate and it's going to recognize a single touch as being something that should generate a gate or select a stage or generate a voltage. Whereas with the bridges and gateways on the Strega, it's more like they are patch points where your finger is the patch cable.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that you actually are going to touch two of them in order to make a connection between them, rather than touching one of them to make something happen.
Yeah. It's not triggering an event. It's making a connection where you're completing the circuit. Yeah.
Yes.
It reminded me, that's kind of where I was thinking about the teleplexer, which not the same thing at all, but it had some element of this where you were completing the connections.
It does have some commonality with the teleplexer. Yeah, okay. Which is made to be touched by patch cables, and these are just made to be touched just with your skin. So you can actually touch these with patch cables too, though, if you want.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Good to know. But of course, it's meant for fingers. We did have one, because I'm mentioning the touch stuff because we did have one question in the chat earlier from Steve Allen about basically he explained his history of trying to use the Make Noise Touch based devices and not having it work for him, and was wondering about sort of the company's policy on explaining that they don't work for everybody. I know, for example, with power supplies, there's some power supplies that work well with Renee and some that don't, and Eurorack companies always have to try to explain when certain things are going to not work for every user. So do you have any thoughts on the issue with touch plates? I personally am lucky, and I always had a good time with my Renee, and I know that some people don't for climate reasons or their skin or whatever. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Should I switch back to my face camera?
I think now, that's good, and we can move to sort of wrapping it up.
Let's
sorry, give me
that's fine. We did get another question sort of related as well to the touch plates, so I'll let you respond to the
so the question of touch plates working or not with different power supplies and things like that was something that rose its head more and more over the years of having the original Renee and the pressure points, as there were more and more power supply options from when they first came out, when there were really only a couple options on the market, to farther down the line, you start to see so many different power supplies available that we couldn't test them all even if we wanted to. So we spent a lot of time testing out a whole lot of different power bricks and power bus boards to kind of figure out where issues were arising from, and found certain ones, especially some of the older Meanwell bricks, had some grounding schemes that just made it so they didn't even work at all, which was frustrating sometimes. Then when we moved to developing the new version of the Renee,
We switched to an entirely different touch sensing technology that doesn't rely on that circuit completion type of capacitive. It's just based on pressure instead. And we tested it with everybody we could find, every supply we could find, putting pieces of paper down on the surface of the module and having paper or cardboard between your finger and the touch plate, and just made sure that it was completely solid across the board, because we don't want people to have to be frustrated like that because the power isn't working correctly with the module. And then also with the zero control, we have a nice advantage in that it's an enclosed device with its own power supply. So we're having it's a lot less likely that you're going to have that kind of problem, unless there's something wrong with something very strange about the way the power itself is working in the building or something like that.
And beyond power, I think that his original question was apparently something to do with skin. And I guess some people, the dryness of your skin, or more having more
with the old Renee, and with pressure points, they do respond differently to different moisture levels in your skin. I personally was the person who we test on the original Renee to see if it didn't work, because I have really dry skin. So if it wasn't going to work, then it would probably not work for me. When we were testing those things, I was usually the one who could be like, I can't get this to work. But that's something that we've put a lot of development time into ensuring that the problem that we're not having going forward. So
cool.
I know that can definitely be frustrating.
Yeah, I appreciate the response. Hopefully Steve sees that. So
to date, I haven't heard anybody having this kind of problem with the current Renee. It was the older Renee.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. Some of these older units, if they work for you and you still have them, they're still good. I have a Renee Mark 1. I haven't upgraded, and I'm happy with it. But if you don't have a Renee at this point, and you want a guarantee that it's going to work, you've never used one, I highly recommend getting a new one. The V2 has a lot to offer, and like Walker said, for a fact that it's going to work well with you. If you can find an old one and you want to give it a shot, but that's not really at this point, I think, up to make noise to confirm that it's going to work for everybody. I don't know.
We have, I do want to note, we have technical support that's always open, and we will do whatever we can to fix things.
And with like legacy, that includes legacy.
Yeah, we will support anything we've ever sold. Yeah. It may not be covered by warranty, but we will always do whatever we can to get anything working for you, no matter what's happened to it.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that. We did have a question about the touch plates. Sysx Studio asked, with the touch plates, is the panel metal or some type of plastic?
You were talking about the Strega?
On the Strega.
It's metal. Now it is. I have kind of pointed out it's different from something like pressure points or zero control. It's the same material as those, but the way it works is just a connection between the two, in which your body is conducting that connection. I have not. I don't think that it will ever cause any of the kind of issues that people encountered with Renee. I think it's going to be just it's a little simpler than all that. It's just connecting two things together. Yeah,
that makes sense. Because technically with Renee, the gestural touch thing has to be communicated to a microcontroller, right? It was because Renee has a
clocked microcontroller in it. That's I don't.
Who knows if that?
I don't know all the specifics, but I can tell you this is a lot more just like a connection's being made.
Yeah. And it's also not necessarily about precise, specific, like every single person touches it and it's going to do the exact same thing. It's more about when you touch it, there's a range of things that can happen, and you learn.
You can create a range of things by. I mean, I've found that I can change the amount of modulation by like just touching the very edge or pressing harder or whatever it is on one of them or things like that.
Is a much more open kind of field than is a note on or off.
It's a little closer to something like a circuit bending or something like that. Just like poking, bridging random. They're not random connections, but they're purposeful. But it's that kind of actual action.
Okay. We have another Renee related question from Lindell T in the chat. I can't remember if you answered this in the past. Will touch latching be able to be added to Renee Mark II in future firmware?
Meaning momentary latching, where you hold a couple touch plates and they hold until you let go.
I think that's what they.
I think that is not a possibility, unfortunately, because in the hardware of the way that touch sensor works, it will time out if you hold it for some number of seconds, and it changes depending on how many plates are held too. So it becomes a situation where it could forget you were holding it or not listen to the next thing. I don't remember exactly what will happen, but there's a hardware limitation there that will keep us from being able to do that. That was the cost of making it more reliable for all users, unfortunately.
Yeah.
However, you can still do the type of press to select unclocked on the latch page that you used to be able to do. It's just that if you want to do latching, it's toggled rather than momentary now, and that's unfortunately that's the only way that it can be.
Okay, hopefully that answered the question. Well, while we've got Walker on the line, any further questions from the chat? We've gone over our time, but we'll save time if anyone has a final question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wait and see. And in the meantime, I'll say thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed it. And if you're watching this later on the Atlanta Synth Club YouTube channel, please be sure to get on Twitch and follow VLSC Records. I'll be doing Atlanta Synth Club events on this Twitch channel once a month, occasionally twice a month. Some of them will be more informal, more like a little get-together synth meet thing with some people sharing what they're working on. We'll probably do some artist interviews and then talk to folks like Walker from companies and designers and other synth-related folks, educators and things like this. Going to have some workshops planned, and it's not all going to be modular. We've got a lot of different things going to be in the mix, and also some video synthesis and graphic artists and things like this. So looks like we do have a question. How has being so close to the design, production, and video production for Make Noise affected your own personal music making? That's from GPK2.
Well, a lot, because it's something that I'm, as they say in the question, I'm very close to the design and production of these instruments, and I'm I guess not only in proximity to it by working, but just the amount of time that I spend close to these designs has definitely had an effect on the way that I do everything creative, I think, not just music. But the way that Tony's design does have I think, as we were talking before about how the aesthetic, the form, and the function are really just completely tied together, and it's often we find things where structures that are created musically are kind of built up from below rather than like imposed down from the top and things like that. That kind of stuff has made its way into my thinking on not just music but just about everything. So I have definitely been heavily influenced by working on Make Noise designs when it comes to making my own music. And I think, if you watch our YouTube channel, this is something I've talked about some on the channel too. I really I really the sort of types of experiences and epiphanies you can get while patching are something that I like to talk about and explore in kind of theory while talking on the YouTube channel, and then applying that to the patching that I do on the channel. And, hopefully that's something that people hear and see and listen to and can be inspired by in their own practice as well, I hope. So I hope that answers the question. I mean, I guess the basic answer is yes.
Yeah, I think that does. And I should say we should add to that, if you're not already subscribed to Make Noise's YouTube channel, Walker's putting up all kinds of great content on there. And there's a long history of really informational and cool videos on there about Make Noise modules and principles.
I think we're getting close to about 400 videos on the channel now. So
wow, that's amazing.
You are bored for some reason.
And there's principles there if you're learning synthesis, not just about these specific modules, but about sound and synthesis in general. Also, even in the manuals, I know when I was first learning, I learned things. I would try to do a patch from a Make Noise manual, and I didn't have all the modules that were involved, but I would use the ones I had with my Make Noise module, whatever I've had, a function or an STO or whatever, and I would fill in the gaps. And so anyway, there's a lot of great information. Thanks once more. I think we're at. Oh, I keep saying we're done, and then we get another question. I'm
not in any big rush here.
Okay,
so
I'm not either.
Yeah,
we actually have more people in the chat than we did earlier. So, any ETA on when Strega will be available? Love you, Walker.
Love you too. I can tell you for sure that Strega has already started leaving the building, so they're shipping out. They're shipping out to dealers as we speak. I mean, today's Sunday, so they're not shipping out today. More orders will be shipping out this week. I anticipate they're going to make it into people's hands any day now. Now that'll all depend on where you're buying it from, but people in Atlanta probably getting it from U.S. based dealers that are going to have them if they don't already. Yeah.
All right, we got some yeses in the chat, so people are excited. I know I'm excited to get my hands on one at some point.
Very excited for people to start, getting to play Strega. I can't wait to hear what people do with it. It's been striking to me how different it sounds when different people play it. Like what Sarah Bell Reed did and what Heinbach did and what Alessandro does sound very different from what I do with it. And they all sound like Strega too in their own ways. Yeah.
And that's kind of the ideal, back to sort of maybe the meta musician thing and the conditions of possibility, like creating something with many paths. We said there's many ways in, but then there's also, it branches out. But then that there's this character, some kind of signature that is present in all of it,
Right.
That's maybe the ideal. At least as a musician, I can say that. I can't speak for the company. But anyway, I think that's about it for the questions. It's been so great to have you. Really looking forward to having some in-person stuff like this again at some point once it's safe. I'd love to have you back down.
Hopefully that won't be too much longer.
Yep, hopefully. And in the meantime, if you're new to VLSC Records Twitch, if you're new to Twitch in general, I'll mention, because we got some Atlanta Synth Club folks joining us for the first time. We do a variety of different streaming content on this channel. VLSC is a local Atlanta-based collective of artists and musicians. We release music on Bandcamp. We used to throw parties and raves and all kinds of musical events live. Since the pandemic started, we've transitioned to mainly using this Twitch platform. And Walker was actually one of our featured musicians. We've done a series called Dance Your Heart Out. It started originally, hence the name, as a club event where DJs played and they raised money for various charities. So it's the idea to do a benefit stream for causes that we care about, primarily social justice and other things of that nature, but just whatever we're feeling at the time. And Walker participated on one about civil rights and against police brutality and racism in America. And we raised a lot of money that day for a number of causes. And the concept behind them, if you're not familiar, we do a musical artist of some kind, and they're paired with some visual artists. and sometimes you have some pretty interesting combinations that are not what you'd expect. So that was a pretty cool one. We had a modular synth and then like live coding stuff going on.
It was really cool for me because I don't think I had seen the visual element until it actually was on the stream. So getting to see the live coding warping up my video was really fun.
I'm blanking on the name of the visual artist you were paired with. It was one of Sabia, the Glad Scientist's friends. If anyone knows in the chat, you can mention them.
Sorry, I'm blanking on it too.
It's fine, but no. Ugh, I should know this. Oh well. Anyway. Edit that out. No, but we're live, so I can't. But it's fine. Anyway, we do love our visual artists. And so we've got more of those coming up. We've got other events. If you're interested in that kind of thing, be sure to follow. And we've got a range, everything like live musicians, DJs, modular synth, electronic music of all kinds. And some really amazing visual art. I mean, some of this stuff, like, I'm not just saying it because I'm involved in the crew. I'm just blown away by some of the video artists and filmmakers that we've gotten in the mix, and computer graphics and things that I just can't even fathom, and video synthesis and stuff like this. So if you're interested in seeing that stuff, please check out the channel. Stay locked in on Twitch, and for this Synth Sundays, we'll be back, and I'll share about it and post about it on Instagram and Facebook and stuff, and we'll have guests like Walker, and we'll also have more informal workshops and tutorials. So I think that's going to wrap it up for us. And once again, Walker, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
All right. Bye.
Bye.